Good evening. Welcome to Mission Summer tonight, to Sunday Night Live. My name is Carl Glendenning. I'll be the MC all summer long. If this is your first time with us tonight, you can let us know where you are by going up to the upper left-hand corner of your screen, clicking on the arrow, and putting yourself on the map. I'm excited to get back together with all of you guys this week. Hope you had a great week. This week we will not have, just to give you a heads up, we will not have a global mission spotlight with students from around the world. Instead, this week we're going to have the opportunity to hear from you guys. And so right now, I want you to kind of stop what you're doing. I want you to think a little bit for me here, because you're going to get the opportunity to be an active participant kind of with everyone live, not just in the breakout session. So I want you to think about a step of faith you took or a way you saw the Lord move this week in relation to Mission Summer. We also would love to hear if any of you shared your faith this week, how that went, which is actually going to lead us to our first poll here. Our first poll of the evening, let me get it up and going for you. The first question is, I stepped out in faith this week and had a spiritual conversation. You can let us know how many people you talked to, 0 to 5 or more than 5. When you shared, let us know what kind of evangelism tool you used. Did you use a survey, Knowing God Personally booklet, perspective cards, Solarium, the Bible, or you didn't use a conversation tool at all? And if you weren't able to get out, no worries. You don't need to give an answer. We understand that not everybody was able to do that. And lastly, we want to know if people saw anyone come to faith this week at all. So as you guys are filling out the poll here, I wanted to give a quick little announcement for you guys for who won our Mission Summer glasses or sunglasses giveaway. This week we've had the missional theme of going, telling others about the good news of Jesus Christ. Here are a few of the responses we received on social media and our new Mission Summer course discussion forum that you may not have known about. 3 of our winners this week are Samantha Crooks from Lenore Ryan University. She shared her testimony on Facebook. This was first for her. So Samantha, we're really proud of you. Way to step out in faith and to post that up there. Our other winner is Laura Hefner from Northwestern University. She was tweeting on Twitter. She said, if I were still, she quoted Hershey from Galatians, if I were still trying to please men, I would be a servant of Christ. Galatians 1:10, a verse from Mission Summer 14 that I related to most. Thanks for sharing, Laura. And then lastly, on the Mission Summer 2014.crew.org discussion forum, the course, Andy Murray posted, the lie I tend to believe is people see me differently. If I try to give them these words of life, I fear that I will lose my reputation. I'm trusting God this week by allowing Him to remind me of a crucial principle and letting God's message to me motivate me to act. It's like what Hershey said this past Sunday. My friends, eternity is more important than what they will think of me. So thanks to our 3 sunglasses giveaway winners. We want you to keep posting. Right now, if you're in a group, take your smartphones out, post on Twitter, post on Facebook that you're with us, and don't forget our hashtag Mission Summer. It's hashtag MSSP14. That way we'll know that you're posting. And join the conversation on the course webpage, Mission Summer 2014.crew.org. We want to hear how God's working in your lives this summer. So first of all, I wanted to kind of share a little bit about my week with you. I had the blessing this weekend to spend the weekend with my kids. My wife was off at the Gospel Coalition, so she got to hear from some great speakers. But earlier in the week, just to let you know, typically I work from the office. I work at Crew's Global Headquarters, and I had a great, refreshing start to my week. I walked onto campus with Jeff Grant, onto Full Sail University, and we went to go share our faith. To be honest, I was a little bit skeptical because Full Sail University, the studies are around there center around entertainment, media, and arts. They have a video game degree you can get in creating video games. So it was a bit of a faith step for me to leave the office and trust God for the results, because I am not an artist and I don't play video games. I'm not into that stuff. But all that to say, to my surprise, I was delighted after connecting with over 14 students on campus, and in a matter of a couple hours, almost every student that we talked to showed some level of interest in spirituality, and the majority of them, when we asked them, said they desired to know God personally. On a scale of 1 to 10, we used the Quest survey. I think one group of 7, 6 out of the 7 guys said a 10 for rating their desire to know God personally. So now we want to actually turn it over to you guys in the audience. We want to hear from you. We want to hear steps of faith you took, ways you saw the Lord move, or conversations you had about Jesus with others. So we have one rule. I'm going to turn the mics off here. So if everybody can be quiet there, the rule we have is we want you to abide by the ABCs of sharing. Be audible, brief, and Christ-centered. If you'd like to share something, let me know. Kind of type it in the chat box, or just go ahead and type it in the chat box, and I'll call on you, and then you can go ahead and share. We're going to give about 10, 15 minutes to share, and then we'll turn it over to Hersh. So if you've got something you'd like to share, a step of faith you took, or you want to tell us a little bit more about what God's doing through Mission Summer, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay. My name is actually Alan Jemiason. I'm at Alex Baker's place, and so we're meeting together as a group. But one of the places where I got to share my faith was at my work. I work at a furniture store, and I work in the warehouse. And a lot of the workers back there are very, let's just say, free. They're very open and free, and they use a lot of flowery language, as my dad puts it. So I really wanted to be able to really reach out with my faith with that. So the day after last week, so Monday, I decided, okay, God, just work inside of me and be able to fill the Holy Spirit out with me, because I cannot do it by myself. And when I got to work the next day, I was seriously considering, like, I can't do this. But I kept on saying, Lord, I need you to help me. I need you to take care of this for me. And sure enough, he actually started a conversation saying, so how's your week been going, blah, 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 blah. And my brother is actually on a keynote from a project, and so the topic of my brother came up, and then I said, what do you think of spiritually? And then it just kind of started from there, and I chatted for about an hour on and off, and I basically just tried to practice listening, which is something that's really difficult for me. And so I basically just listened to his story and kind of what he was at, and reaffirmed the things that I believed were true. But then when something was not quite there, I didn't automatically say, well, that's wrong, that's not Christian, because it would have totally turned him off. I didn't have a chance to use the KGP at all, but at the end of the session, I offered it to him, which he then rejected. But I hope that because of this experience, I'm able to have new opportunities to share, as well as him to come with questions if he hasn't. So that was kind of one of my experiences that I had this week.
Cool. Alan, that is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we started Mission Summer, because we know that students have to work for the summer, and so we want to equip them to be able to share their faith in the workplace. You're not going to be in college for your whole life, and so the goal is that you would be living missionally no matter what you're doing. So we're really proud of you. Thanks for sharing that story. Looks like we've got one more. So we've got Alexandria.
Moving, I've always really had a really tough time praying. I can't focus at all. But having all of this stuff, the book right in front of me, having all the conversations, having all the materials. God's at the forefront because I'm immersing myself in all this stuff, not like I normally would. And I've come to find out that praying out loud really works, and just even reading some of the stuff out loud, watching some of the videos, and I can see that God really wanted me to do this so that I'd be able to get better at communicating with Him and having a relationship with Him. And thanks to this, that I've had a great couple weeks, and I've been able to really grow a lot, just being immersed in the materials more and having a better relationship with God from everything I've done and everything I've read. And
That's great, Alexandria. Thanks so much. And it doesn't minimize it at all that you're working at in a kind of a church camp environment or whatever kind of environment there where there's a lot of believers. I mean, sometimes in ministry, we can even have a hard time walking with Jesus. And so the fact that we have materials like this in front of us, we have Hershey reminding us each week of just solid biblical truths that we need to be stepping out in faith in. That's great. Thanks so much. Anybody else? Looks like Jeff Grant had something. Let's hear from Jeff.
All right, great. So I got the chance to go out with Carl, which was cool. Again, we went to Full Sail University, and what just blew me away was, we prayed beforehand, and God really opened up doors. The moment we stepped on campus, we walked right up to kind of the front doors of one area, and it seemed like the whole time we were there, just maybe an hour, hour and a half, there was never a time that we weren't talking to students, and it was great. They were very open. Again, very impressed. I probably only talked to maybe 5 people who said they were Christians the whole time, and yet everybody that we spoke with was very interested in the conversation. They cared about what we had to say. We put it in a way of using the Quest survey, so just really asking them their thoughts about stuff. Came away as very non-combative. It wasn't pushy, and yet it gave people a chance to really share what was on their heart. And it became a real relational dialogue back and forth between us, and that was really neat. Opened up a lot of doors, and I had 15 people who signed up saying that they wanted to continue on to have more conversations like that. So I think we're going to make that a regular thing that we get to do. It's just exciting to be able to just pop over and start conversations, even for people who've done it before. Crew staff are supposed to be more experienced with this. Still, every time you step out for the first time, it's a little nervous. You're like, I'm not sure how people are going to react. And then, people start to open up and respond, and you're like, oh, yeah, this is easy. When God is with you, you don't have to have all the right words. He'll be there for you, which is great.
Thanks, Jeff. It was really a joy to go with you. I really appreciated your invitation, and it's cool. One thing about where we were, Full Sail actually doesn't have a campus ministry right at the moment. We're looking to launch a ministry, and so those 15 contacts represent 3 more handfuls of people that we didn't have before. And so we're excited to help launch that. So if you are back on campus, we want to encourage you to continue to take steps to go on campus and share. Or maybe you're at home, away from campus. I know some of you are, and there's universities there. Go on campus there and see if you can connect to people there, and maybe there is a crew there, maybe there isn't. You could be part of helping launch a new ministry, a new movement, and a campus where there aren't people currently having the opportunity to have spiritual conversations on a regular basis with us and crew. So right now we've got time for one last question. We got Eric Coyanzo, and we're gonna take his question, and then we'll transition over.
Just these past couple of days, I have a friend who was inviting me to meet about some company that they're starting, and at first I wasn't really sure whether to go or not, but the simple fact that he kept insisting, I just kind of gave in. So I went, and I was a little late to the meeting, but I went, and there was a group of people. There was 3 girls and another guy, my friend, and me and myself. and they started telling me about their company and everything. But as time passed by, they started asking me what I was doing, or if I went to college and all that stuff. And I started telling them about the ministry that we want to start. With Campus Crusades with you guys. And it caught my attention because 3 of those people turned out to be Christians. And it's amazing because 3 of them told me that they felt that they've been a little away from Christ, and they actually go to the same college that I'm starting the ministry at, CSUN. So that was just a real blessing. I just got to share a little bit of my own experience, what it is to be a Christian, and my own walk with Christ with them. And one of the girls, Alba, we exchanged numbers, and she was really interested in joining the ministry just because, again, she goes to CSUN. So, yeah, just thought I'd share that. I was really joyful, when that happened. So, yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Eric. One thing to let you know, so if you're like Eric and you don't have crew on your campus and you're looking to start one, or you're on a campus that doesn't have crew and you don't even know who to talk to start to, there's 2 guys on with us that I can connect you with, Brian Hudkins and Jeff Grant, who you just heard from right before Eric. They help us launch new ministries from distance locations. And so they'll give you coaching, walk you through what you would need to start a ministry on your campus if there isn't one. So we would love to be a resource on that level. But for now, we're going to transition over to Hersh. Tonight he's going to be talking about spiritual multiplication. And Hersh, take it on.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Hey, hello to everybody. Encouraged by the things that a few of you were able to share. I assume some of you have been watching the World Cup a little bit. Of course, Tuesday's a big day for us, for the U.S. It was interesting to me as I was peeking. I didn't watch a lot of it today, just peeked a little bit. But it was interesting. It struck me as I watched the faces of the fans in the crowd at the World Cup, different scenes, how intensely, how passionate they were about their team winning. And I thought, wow, one thing that's always struck me is how passionate we are to identify with a cause, vision that we can attach ourselves to and commit ourselves to. And in this case, with sports, we attach ourselves to our team and really, really own how our team is doing. Well, and are passionate about it, even though we're not on the team. We say it's our team won. Well, when I was in school, in college at Penn State, I went into school like maybe a lot of you. I was involved in all kinds of activities in high school and all that kind of stuff. And I'll talk more about this next week when I talk about eternal perspective. But I think as a young college guy, true in high school as well, I was looking for a vision for my life that I could passionately be committed to, in which I could make a difference. And I wasn't walking with the Lord when I first started my freshman year at Penn State, started to then. And it was when, through my involvement with Crew, I began to understand about discipleship. Now, we've talked about evangelism the last 2 weeks. Tonight, we're going to talk about discipleship. And I started to catch the vision for it while I was there in school. After I graduated, I remember when I came back to visit our Crew movement at Penn State, like 2 years after I graduated. I hadn't been there in 2 years, and I go show up at the weekly meeting, and I start meeting students, and I bumped into a guy named Doug. And Doug starts telling me his story about how he's come to Christ and how his life's been changing. And he says, well, I've been discipled by a guy named Lee. And I say, you mean Lee Carrere? He says, yeah. And I remembered Lee because he was in the Theta Delta Chi fraternity in my ministry while I was there with fraternity guys. But I remember Lee well because he'd been discipled by Jack. And I knew Jack well because he was discipled by a guy named Zeke, who was a guy I discipled. So I'm standing talking to Doug, who'd been discipled by Lee, who'd been discipled by Jack, who'd been discipled by Zeke, who I discipled. And as I'm standing there talking to Doug, I realize I'm talking to my spiritual great-great-grandson in the faith, who I'd never met. He only came along and came to Christ after I graduated. So I discipled Zeke, who discipled Jack, who then discipled Lee, who was now ministering to this guy, Doug. And that just cemented the convictions that had developed in my life while I was in college about the significance of discipleship. And I realized as I, through my college years, how being part of Jesus' plan of discipleship, we could literally impact the whole world. And so tonight I want to talk about discipleship and why Jesus, what Jesus did and why he did it, to deepen our convictions about why we're involved in it, explain it a little more. No doubt most of you have heard about discipleship, maybe been involved in being discipled, I'm not sure. But I want to dive into it. Let me first start off, in my PowerPoint I have a couple pictures. I told you, I think last week, about my son. It's my son Brett, who I mentioned last week, who was the one who was killed in Afghanistan. There's another picture of him in Afghanistan, in one of the bunkers there. And then this is one, the last picture is one on our family vacation. We went to the lake every year for vacation. And my two sons were always creating fun things to do at the lake. And this picture here was one of the things we created, was throwing tennis balls from the back of the boat to the guy skiing. So here you see my son Brett with a handful of tennis balls and one in his mouth. And I would stand at the back of the boat. My wife or daughter would drive, and I would stand at the back of the boat. We're going about 20, 25 miles an hour. And I would launch the tennis balls in a lob toward either one of my sons, and they would hold on with one hand and catch with the other. We think we had the Guinness Book World Record for most number of tennis balls caught in a lake in the back of a ski boat. My son caught 14 out of 15 one particular time. The only one we missed was because I gave him a bad throw. He was really terrific, coordinated, athletic, and that was one of the fun things we did. Now, why am I telling you about Brett? Well, because he really bought into what we're talking about tonight. When he went to college as a freshman at Indiana, he really bought into this vision of discipleship. He joined a fraternity so he can have a ministry. Two guys in his fraternity. He was helping lead the Bible study in his house before he went to Afghanistan. But he was a guy who really understood the value of investing your life in other men, as he himself was, someone was investing in him. So let's talk about discipleship a little bit tonight. There's a verse that I know we're mostly all familiar with, Matthew 28, 18 to 20, so we're not even going to go there and look at it. I think you've heard it in Greek, Hebrew, Pig Latin, everything possible. But Matthew 28 is the last thing Jesus says to his disciples, as you know, before he ascends into heaven. And he's telling the disciples, he's giving them the commission of what he wants them to do. He's about to go into heaven, and he's leaving the work of the kingdom in their hands. So obviously, you know, it's hugely significant because it's the last thing he says to them before he leaves. And it's the one where he says, all authority has been given to me on heaven and earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations. That was his command. And the Great Commission stated in a couple of different ways in the Gospels. It's stated both quantitatively and qualitatively, if you will. Quantitatively in Mark 16, he says, go into the world and preach the gospel to all creation. And here in Matthew 28, he says, make disciples of all the nations. So the commission is to proclaim Jesus to everyone. And while we're doing that, go therefore, while we're going, to make disciples of all the nations, which in Greek is ethne, which means people group. We'll talk about that in the last week that I'm with you. But it's to make disciples of every people group on the planet, of the whole earth. And that was the commission. Now, Jesus' strategy was one of discipleship. A book I want to commend to you, and I read in college. If you haven't yet read it, grab it. Dare I say, maybe even read it before you read the finishers. I don't know how I can say that. But a book that I read in college There's got two different covers now, called The Master Plan of Evangelism. The Master Plan of Evangelism. Highly recommend. It's a very short read, but it's a study done by Dr. Robert Coleman on what Jesus did with the 12 disciples. It's simply looking at his life and how Jesus built the kingdom on those 12 men. I read that book in college and it revolutionized my thinking and literally changed the trajectory of what I've done with the last 42 years of my life. Because as I read that book and studied it, I realized, well, when I think about a ministry impact that I want to have the rest of my life, who better to base my strategic thinking on, my philosophy of ministry on, than Jesus, than what Jesus did. Now, I want you to look at Luke chapter 6. If you have your Bible there, you can look at it. I have it on PowerPoint, but feel free to grab your Bible if you would. And I want you to see this one passage where Jesus talks about discipleship. And here's what he says in verse 12 about his strategy. It says, it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray. And he spent the whole night in prayer to God. Now, of course, the text doesn't say what he prayed about. You know, what did he commune with the Father about? Probably many things. But what we know is that what he did the next day was hugely significant. Look at verse 13. And when day came, that is, after spending a night in prayer with the Father, he called his 12 disciples to him and chose 12 of them whom he named as apostles. And then in 14 and 15 and 16, he gives the names of all the disciples. Peter, James, John, all the boys. Then verse 17, watch this. And he descended with them and stood on a level place. And there was a great multitude of his disciples and a great throng of people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coastal region of Tyre and Sidon. So notice in this passage, Jesus spends the whole night in prayer. The next day, he chooses his 12 disciples. And notice, he had many more than 12. He said as he descended with them, the 12, he stood on a level place, and there was a great multitude of disciples. Disciples means learners. So Jesus had many, many people following. We know that masses of people followed after him, heard his teaching. We know he appointed the 12, and he sent them out 2 by 2. Later, in Luke chapter 10, it talks about he sent 70 out 2 by 2. So he had a large number of people following him. But when you read through the Gospels, you see that Jesus' primary strategy was built around the 12. And everything he did, and almost everywhere he went, he took the 12 with him. Sometimes he only took 3, Peter, James, and John. But his whole life seemed to be imparting who he was, his convictions, the Father's heart. He modeled things that the disciples caught by being around his life. I mean, if you can imagine, everywhere Jesus went, and they're with him, they're catching from him things that they never learned from any other Jewish rabbi. Look at this next verse on the PowerPoint, Mark chapter 3, verse 14. Here it says very succinctly what Jesus did with the 12. It says he appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. The genius of Jesus' whole strategy and philosophy of ministry was to take these 12 men, and as he traveled from village to village throughout Judea, Samaria, and then ultimately in Jerusalem, these 12 men followed after him, learned from him, caught his life. He modeled to them things that no other Jewish rabbi did in that day. In that day, serious, devout Jewish young men would attach themselves to a rabbi. And the way they learned was by spending time with that rabbi. So Jesus actually chose these 12 so they would be attached to him. And as is often said about discipleship is caught more than taught. The discipleship is not just sitting in a room and having someone teach you the Bible, but it's spending time with that person so they can pour their life into you, and you can learn from what they do and their responses and how they relate to people. So the 12 were captured by the heart and life of Christ by being with him and being involved in ministry with him and being sent out to minister by him. Now, it was not only in the life of Christ, but you see that it was picked up by the life of Paul. This next verse in 2 Timothy 2, 1 and 2, we're talking here about spiritual multiplication. That's the phrase we use a lot in our ministries on the previous slide. Spiritual multiplication. And here's what Paul talks about it. You know, of course, 2 Timothy was written by Paul, disciple. He picked him up on a second missionary journey. And everywhere Paul went on a second and third missionary journey, Timothy went with him. And when Paul is writing 2 Timothy 2, 1 and 2, Paul's in prison. He's about to be executed. And so he is saying to Timothy, his beloved disciple, he's passing the baton on to Timothy. This is, Timothy, I'm about to go home to be with the Lord in heaven. And I'm passing the baton on to you. And here's what he says, obviously very significant. 1 and 2 Timothy, he's writing to Timothy, who's now leading the church in Ephesus. And one of the things of many that he says to him in 1 and 2 Timothy is this one, you therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, these entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So Paul says, Timothy, the things I taught you, you teach to faithful men who will teach others also. Now you ask the question, how many generations of discipleship do we have in this verse? And it's 4. Paul says, the things I taught you, Timothy, you teach to faithful men who will teach others also. Now there's a diagram of this, a simple diagram. Paul says, Timothy, the things I taught you, you teach faithful men, you teach others. We call this spiritual multiplication. And the thing that I was grabbed by when I was in college was the reality that through spiritual multiplication, I could literally have an impact all around the world by just investing my life in a few men. In fact, I want to show you a little diagram about the power of multiplication. As a simple illustration, in the first year, if you take one person and disciple one person and teach them what you've learned about walking with Jesus, and in the second year, each of you teaches one more person. And the third year, those 4 teach 8. You get the idea. And by the 10th year, you'd have 1,024 disciples. By year 15, you'd have 32,768 disciples. Guess how many you'd have by the 33rd year? And if we were all interactive here, if we were able to mute you all, unmute you, you would all give your answers. What do you think, after 33 years, how many disciples you have? Well, the answer is over 8 billion. 8 billion people. Basically the whole world. Now you say, well, if that's true, why haven't we already reached the whole world for Christ? Well, a couple obvious reasons is, one, the chains break down, is that people don't keep multiplying their life, so the chains are broken. And secondly, we aren't going to reach the whole world until we cross all ethnic and cultural boundaries, and many, many people go cross-cultural to those people who are yet reached. But the illustration still serves the point of giving the vision for multiplying your life and how you can influence the whole world. Here's an example. This guy, John, I have on my slide here. John was the man I had the privilege of discipling my first couple of years at Miami of Ohio. And his story, very briefly, is that I had the privilege of working with him for a couple of years and helping him learn to share his faith and have a ministry. Well, he spent the rest of his life, I won't go into all the details, but in East Asia. He went with Northwest Airlines, and he and a group of other young men and women started to plant a small church in a large city in East Asia. And that church has grown to, the last count, over 3,500 people showing up on a Sunday morning in East Asia. And it's an expatriate church. There are people from there, from all different nations. In one particular year, he said, there are people from as many as 60 different nations that come out on Sunday morning. This is a city in East Asia. And so I had the privilege of being a part of his life when he was a junior and senior in college. And now for the last 30 years, he's influencing hundreds and hundreds and maybe even thousands of people in a large city in East Asia as a businessman with Northwest Airlines. So when you invest in people that you disciple, you just never know the impact you may have all over the world by the people that you invest your life in. And John is just one example of one of the men I had the privilege of spending time with. Well, let's talk about a little bit about some real practical things about discipleship. I want to share with you some of the best things I have learned about discipling First of all, let me define a little bit what a biblical disciple means. Again, if I were to ask you, if we were to unmute everybody, and I were to say, hey, tell me what's true of a biblical disciple, you know, you might throw out 40 different things that is true of a biblical disciple in terms of his character, his walk, his love for the Word, his compassion for the lost, all kinds of things you would share. I have summarized the many things you can say in a simple little thing that helps me think through where I want to take someone when I disciple them. And that's this, that a biblical disciple is someone who walks by faith. That is, they're an ongoing, developing, growing relationship with Jesus, which involves many, many things in the Word, prayer, holiness, so forth. But secondly, a biblical disciple is also someone who communicates his faith. Next slide. He communicates his faith. That is, a biblical disciple is continuing learning, how do I relate to the non-Christian world around me? How do I communicate with those who are outside the faith in a way that they can understand? How do I share my story, which we've talked about? How do I explain the gospel? How do I answer those most difficult questions? How do we communicate to a lost world about Jesus? Thirdly, is a biblical disciple someone who multiplies his faith. And that is, he takes what God has entrusted to him and he passes on to other people. Now, obviously, there's lots of ways you can multiply your faith. There's lots of ways to communicate your faith. While you're on campus involved with crew, we do certain specific things in a college campus setting. And the way you communicate your faith and multiply your faith in the business world is probably going to look differently. It's going to look differently if you're working with people in a village in India, if you're a professor on a campus. So there's lots of ways we communicate and multiply our faith. So not to get bogged down in the mechanics of it, but the point is, if I'm really on mission with Christ, if I've really embraced the Great Commission, then I'm going to be continually walking with Jesus, continually communicate with the lost world, and continuing to pass on to others what's been entrusted to me so they can pass it on to others. We'll show you a picture of another guy I got discipled when I was at Miami. Wow, this is Eric. And his brief story is that he came out of the hood in Cleveland. He was quite a successful business person. He started his own pharmaceutical company in high school, selling drugs. And a dynamic leader, but totally with no spiritual orientation whatsoever. He came to Christ in college through a fabulous series of different events. I had the privilege of discipling him. And even though we were a generation apart and different racial background, and he grew up in the hood in the city, and I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, he became like a son to me. And I had the privilege of discipling him. And he, upon graduation, spent a few years on a staff. Then he went to seminary. Now he's pastoring a church in inner city Detroit, in the poorest part of inner city Detroit. This is his next slide. Is his team of people. Interracial team in the poorest part of inner city Detroit. And the cool thing is, the stuff that I taught him about discipleship, he has taken it and he's figured out how to adapt it into a local church setting in the inner city. And he's teaching people to walk, communicate, and multiply their faith in the poorest part of inner city Detroit. Now, one of the things I taught him was the next and final slide I want to show you. And that is 3 key components of quality discipleship. And I share these because this is my grid for what makes for good quality discipleship. Because a lot of times we think discipleship is sitting down and teaching someone everything I can about the Bible, or it's sitting down at Starbucks and just talking to people about life. We often use the expression, we're doing life together. Well, indeed, that is a part of discipleship, but I think it's more than that. And I want to suggest it's these 3 things that really make for quality discipleship. And it's these 3. One is, yes, I build a relationship. I get involved in somebody's life. I learn how to listen. I learn how to be vulnerable and transparent about my own life. We do things together, hang out together. You know, guys, we go shopping together. Ladies, we pump iron together. You know, whatever it is. We do things relationally so that we're really, quote, doing life together. But secondly, it's also helping another person learn the scriptures, getting into the Word together, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's in small groups, whether it's going to church together, going to crew meetings together, Bible studies, lots of ways, but I'm helping people get biblical perspective in their life so that their convictions are based on Scripture, not just because, well, I do this or that because I'm involved with crew, which is a nice thing, but no, I share my faith and I'm involved in discipleship and I pray for the world because I've internalized these convictions from the Scriptures. But then the third thing is doing ministry together. And I want to suggest this is the one that's most often left out because this is the hardest. And that is real discipleship is being on mission together with a disciple. Okay? It's not just going to Starbucks and talking about life, which is a part of it. And it's not just reading the Bible and studying the Bible together, which is a big part of it. But it's saying together, let's be involved in ministry. Let's figure out how to share our faith together. Let's go after this mission, whether it's on the campus, whether it's home over the summer, people you're reaching out to. It's accountability. It's doing ministry together. And I look back on my own years at Penn State, and this is what really turned it for me. Larry was my first disciple freshman and sophomore year, and Dave my junior year. And in both cases, they did all three of these things with me. They got me into the Scripture. We built a relationship. They were real, transparent, shared their own struggles. But one of the biggest things that helped me was they took me out and helped me learn to share my faith. They helped me engage in ministry with them. Larry, we went out on campus and shared our faith together in the student union. Dave, he took me into fraternities, and I learned how to share my testimony and how to speak and share with guys. And that's where my faith was accelerated as we were involved in the mission together. Now, I want to wrap this up, and then I think maybe there'll be some Q&A. But as you think about these things, walk, communicate, and multiply, and relationship and word and ministry, that my vision for how I want to develop a person as a disciple, to walk, communicate, and multiply, is what dictates what I do with people. Because I want to help them to learn to walk, communicate, and multiply, I want to build a relationship, get into the Word, and be involved in ministry together. If all discipleship was dumping as much theology into your life as I could, then all I would do with you is sit down and read books and maybe study the Bible. If that's all discipleship is getting theology into your brain. But since it's much more than that, it necessitates these things. Now, what I want you to think about, I guess we're going to have breakouts, maybe a little Q&A, is I give you a couple of questions here to wrestle with. Where do you think you are in the whole walk, communicate, and multiply paradigm? And where do you think you are in terms of effectiveness in these three things? Now, nobody starts out as a perfect discipler. It takes time to learn how to disciple well. And so this is a growing process. Nobody does this perfectly and perfectly in balance, but it's what we grow toward to become effective disciples. I close with this. The vision of all this is you can have an impact literally around the world, whether or not you ever go to another country, by investing your life in 1, 2, or 3 other people this year on campus, this summer. You disciple someone who disciples someone else, who disciples someone else, and literally you can make a difference all around the world. All right? Well, let's stop it with that, Carl. I will refer you to you for further reading on this. It's been suggested to you, my chapter in the Finishers on spiritual multiplication. I talk much more in detail about these things. The Compass has a couple of great lessons, a primer on discipleship. You may want to check those out. Excellent stuff on discipleship. All right, Carl, to you.
First, this is great stuff. Thanks so much. Guys, I have had the privilege. I don't think you fully understand who we have in front of us here tonight. I mean, Roger Hershey is just a man, but he's a man that God has used mightily. I have seen a map that he rolled out in front of an audience once that kind of has everyone. Hershey, there it is. This is the map. He has got names all around the world of people that he has. Are they all personally discipled, Hersh?
Many of these are guys I discipled, but I also included people my wife discipled, and we're just discipled as a part of our movement, not all by me.
And he prays for them. I mean, it's powerful to see the sheer number of names there. And And really, you can even look on campuses today around the Mid-Atlantic area and kind of the Great Lakes region, and there are people that are probably on staff as directors in their 20s and 30s that can directly connect themselves to Hershey through spiritual multiplication. And so just by having that model as learners, that's what disciples are. We are learners that teach others to learn about Jesus. And so thank you so much, Hershey. We're going to, real quick, I'm going to put a poll up here so you guys can think through some questions that you might have for Hershey. But the poll is one that should have gone up earlier, but we'll go ahead and share that with you while you think of some questions for Hershey. So we've got one right now. Oh, I guess it wasn't a question. Someone was excited about the map. He said, but you better scan it just to make sure you don't lose it. So.
Okay, good idea. It is old.
Any questions for Hershey tonight on discipleship?
While they're thinking, bro, you still hear me?
Yeah, we all hear you. We can see you.
While they're thinking, I didn't mention this just because of time, but when I took this map, this was in the 80s, I would drive around campus, and I put my finger on on the map on little Miami of Ohio, which is over here, which most people think is Florida. And I just put my finger on the map and I pray, Lord, would you raise up men and women who would be on every continent of the world someday from this little campus. And I'd drive by dorms and fraternities and where the athletic facilities were. And my prayer was just, Lord, raise up laborers from these dorms, these houses, who would be all over the world someday. So the map was just kind of a visual aid of why I was on the campus and why at 63 years old, I'm still working with college students. Because I believe that from the college campus, men and women will be raised up who will help reach the world with the gospel in all kinds of ways, shapes, and forms, church planners, missionaries, businessmen, pastors. So that was the context of the map. So maybe this question.
Yeah, we've got a couple here. Just to reiterate it, go ahead and type it in the chat box if you do have a question. First question is, sharing the gospel with people is huge, but when you say do ministry together, are there other examples of what you mean by that?
Oh, fabulous question. Absolutely. It could be everything from spending time together, whether in a group prayer meeting or individual prayer, praying for the world. For me, it meant on campus, not only sharing my faith, but following up a new believer together, meeting with a guy who just came to Christ with a disciple. Every time I had an appointment on campus, I always took a student with me that I was discipling, whether it's evangelism or follow-up or discipleship. Anything I was doing to try to minister to somebody else, I wanted a disciple to be with me so they could learn. But it was things like going on trips together, going on spring break trips. I took numbers of disciples overseas on mission, spring break trips to Albania, spring break trip to inner city Chicago. Eric, the African American guy whose picture I showed you. I remember the spring break we went to inner city to do ministry together. And we did all kinds of things, not only evangelism, but different forms of outreach to meet the needs of people. So anytime you're involved in ministry to someone else, the point is, take someone you're discipling with you so they can catch your heart. They can see you relate, see how you pray. I remember when I'd take my disciples at a conference and we'd get on our knees around our bed at a Christmas conference. And I pulled out my world map and we knelt beside our bed, about 8 of us around the bed, praying for the world and for our campus in light of the world. And that was a way of communicating vision and conviction to these guys. So, many things beside evangelism that you can be doing.
Yeah.
Today, things we do with the sex slave trade, fundraiser deals and all those things that we, are involved in. So, yes.
That's great.
Great question.
So here's another one from Alexandria Simpson. Should you disciple more than one person at a time? And do you see age as a large deciding factor?
I'm not sure, maybe this person can clarify if they mean when I meet with someone, is it good to meet with 1, 2, or 3 at a time, or do they mean I may have 3 different people in my life? Let me answer it both ways. A lot of times, as I discipled students, like in Miami, a lot of times they would have 3 of their own disciples that they would meet with separately, one-on-one. So yeah, it depends on the student, depends on how much time they have on campus, whether whatever their time frame is. But I would have sometimes students who would disciple 1, 2, or 3 people, or even 4 or 5. But if they're asking, is it good to meet with them 1 at a time or 1-on-2? I think you can do it both ways. Sometimes you can meet with 2 people at once or 3 people at once, and the accountability of that group interaction together can help the discipleship process. So you're meeting with Mary, but you may also meet with Sally and Jane at the same time, because Sally and Jane also can be a part of Mary processing the things you're talking about. So I'm not sure which question they're asking, but what was the second part of that, Carl? How many of you disciples? Oh, age.
Do you see age?
I wonder if she's asking is the deterrent, or let's put it this way. When I was at Penn State in my 50s, all the way up to age 60, I was discipling guys from campus. And I found a lot of times, so if she's asking, does it matter when you get older, you can't disciple someone? Or maybe she's asking, if you're younger, can you disciple someone? And my answer to that is, I don't think there's an age limit. I think it's an issue of, has Jesus done something in my life? Has he been teaching me things? Do I have something I can pass on to somebody? Then I don't think age is an issue. I think you can disciple someone older than you, certainly people younger than you. Depends on people's level of teachability and hunger and desire. You know, if you're 20, I think you can still disciple someone at age 30 if they're teachable and hungry, but they're younger in their faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maturity is a big deal, that's for sure. So we've got another question. We've got lots of questions here.
Okay, good.
And Alexandria said, thank you, Hersh. That's what I wanted to know.
Okay.
So you answered a question.
Right.
Alex Baker, his group, says, how do you start ministry with a seeker you're trying to disciple? They're open to participate, but still have ideas that are not biblical.
Okay.
Are you discipling them if they're not a believer? Might be the first question.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how technical you want to be about it. I suppose, the question could be asked, when did Jesus' disciples, when were they really regenerated? When did they really understand? And, some of them didn't understand until after the resurrection. Even then they were struggling, Thomas. So, yeah, technically, can you disciple someone who's not yet a believer? I suppose. I don't know how technical you want to get. But if you have a seeker and they want, the issue is, how open are they to learning? If a disciple is a learner, what I would do in that case was, if the person says, yes, I want to continue to have dialogue, I want to continue to learn about this, and they're willing to read through the Gospel of John with you and discuss it, or read a book, an apologetic book, if you identify whatever the issue is, that could be most helpful. Take Tim Keller's The Reason for Faith, or take one of Lee Strobel's books. You got to identify what is the hindrance to that seeker. Is it intellectual? Is it moral? We talked about that, I think, that one time. What's the real issue? But if they are seeking and they're willing to keep learning, meeting, reading, I challenge them to read through a book of the Bible with you, another book, listen to a podcast with you and discuss it. Sure, keep doing that. At some point, of course, you have to decide how hungry are they? Do they really want to learn? You got to decide that. How much time do you invest if they're not really, really, really wanting to learn? That's the question. I've had people I continue to invest in, only to find out they really, really didn't really want to pursue the Lord down the road. And I asked the question, could have I and should have I spent more time with some other people? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So here's one more question. This will be our last one. How long generally do people do discipleship?
How long do they do discipleship? You mean in terms of, are they talking about in terms of years? I assume they don't mean like when you have an appointment. They don't mean that, I guess.
Yeah, probably in terms of years, I would guess.
Years of time? Well, let's put it this way. I encourage people always to have a mentor in your life. The rest of your life, if you can have a mentor in your life, absolutely. Now, I do think in terms of the early years of your growth in Christ, that's particularly important when you're learning the basics of how to walk with Christ. But I mean, I was discipled all through college, and once I got out of college and came on staff, I don't know if you'd call it being discipled, but I always had someone that was building into my life. I always had a mentor. And I pursued having a mentor because I don't trust it in our flesh. If we don't have someone speaking into our life, we can go all kinds of astray in all kinds of directions. Now, at certain points in your life, it's not always easy to have a mentor. A mentor is not always available, and you're going to find the struggle when you graduate from college. It may be difficult to find a older person who invests in your life. In whatever community you settle down in, whatever church. In fact, I'd make that a part of choosing what church you go to. Does the church have a discipleship mindset? Is the pastor of the church encouraging people to dive into one another's lives in terms of mentoring and discipleship? So I'd have a mentor as long as I could. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thanks again, Hersh, for taking us to Scripture and showing us the model that Christ gave us for discipleship, the need for relationship, to be in the Word, to do ministry together. One of the comments was, take them with you so they catch your heart. And I love that. Like, I want to be with a mentor that's going to take me with them, that is going to show me kind of what their heart is. And if they're mentoring us or we're mentoring them, we should be intimately walking with Jesus. And hopefully if they catch anything, they catch Jesus. And so thanks again. We're going to go ahead and break out into breakout sessions right now. The first question that we'll have you guys answer and discuss where you think you are now and where you want to be in the area of biblical discipleship, and walking by faith, communicating your faith, and multiplying your faith. Where are you in those three? Walking by faith, communicating your faith, multiplying your faith. And go ahead and discuss those for a little while, and we'll go ahead and broadcast some other questions for you as time progresses.